I think this
Yeah.
is a good transition, though, to something that I want to start talking about, or that I want to get to this episode. I'm excited to talk about this because it's a piece of good news, and I feel like we don't often have that on a show like this. But last week, in New York City, the city council passed new legislation that prohibits fast food chains in this city from firing their employees or reducing their work hours without just cause. So that basically means that going forward, if a fast food company in New York wants to fire an employee, they have to prove that the worker is not doing their job or that they're harming the company somehow. And this is really significant because before this bill, fast food companies could really fire workers for like any reason, at any time with no notice, right? So this bill is basically the first of its kind in the nation. It covers fast food chains that have at least 30 locations nationwide. So, that's McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, Chipotle, name your favorite. And this is really a huge win for fast food workers. Fast food workers, of course, are a low-wage workforce. They have very, very little job security. And I think if you've ever worked in fast food or even just in food service in general, you know how high turnover is, right? You know how easily people get fired or dropped from their shifts or have their hours cut or changed around. And I think that, some of the fast food workers in New York who testified before the city council said that they were fired for things like calling in sick or, not smiling enough, even when customers weren't around. And very often when workers are fired, they're given no reason at all, right? So there's that. And then to kind of, add insult to injury, I guess, right now, fast food employees, of course, are considered essential workers. So they're basically risking their health and their lives every time they have to report to these minimum wage, unstable jobs. And again, these jobs are so low paid that most fast food workers are really living paycheck to paycheck. So if they lose their jobs, they're basically on the brink of extreme financial hardship, right? So this new legislation in New York, I think, really adds an extra layer of job security to this very unstable and precarious workforce. So it's really a crucial protection, I think, especially right now. And then on top of that, I think there's another reason why this new Just Cause bill is really important. And I think it has the potential to change or to challenge the norm of at-will employment in the US. So I think probably a lot of Jacobin viewers are already familiar with this to some extent, but in the US, the standard for the vast majority of workplaces is at-will employment. So that basically means that employers can fire workers at any time for any reason or really, for no reason at all, right? So this gives bosses this kind of massive leverage over their workers because obviously if you know that your employer can cut you off from your income and your health insurance, basically the things that you need to survive, then you're going to be pretty well behaved on the job, or there's going to be a lot that you put up with on the job. And when it comes to at-will employment, I think often you hear like libertarians saying like, well, at-will employment is actually a good thing because it also means that workers can quit for no reason. And that's technically true, but I think it's also a little superficial because your employer being able to take away your means of survival is just really not the same thing as a worker kind of walking out of a company and leaving a business in the lurch for like a few weeks. So to drive home how insidious at-will employment is, I want to talk a little bit about some recent work by the political philosopher Elizabeth Anderson. She is the author of the book Private Government. And I think she has like 1 or 2 interviews in Jacobin. So if you haven't seen those yet, definitely check them out. They're really great. And she's very interesting. Elizabeth Anderson argues that at-will employment grants bosses pretty much total authority over workers, and that in most cases, the power that employers have over employees is actually greater than the power that the state has over its citizens. So I want to pull up a slide. These are a few examples from her book, but she basically lays this out. She says, in the US, under at-will employment, it's basically legal for employers to refuse to grant workers bathroom breaks, search workers' personal belongings, monitor workers' communications, order workers to undergo medical testing, punish workers for their political preferences, and, the list goes on. And I want to read a direct quote from her book because I think it's pretty profound. So she writes, "If the US government imposed such regulations on us, we would rightly protest that our constitutional rights were being violated." And I think that's like very devastating and true. So her second point in her book is that at-will employment, of course, grants bosses all of this power over you during your work hours. But she says it also grants bosses power over what you do outside of work. Because if your boss can sack you for literally any reason or no reason, there's basically nothing that's stopping them from firing you for something that you've done off duty, right? So again, just to list a few examples, in the US, people have been fired for things like smoking outside of work, having premarital sex. Obviously, people are fired all the time for their political activity or, their various behavior on social media. And this is all to say that the at-will contract tips the scales like extremely heavily in favor of employers. So, it's not really much of a surprise that bosses and companies and their lawyers just love at-will employment, right? I don't know if you remember during Bernie Sanders' presidential run, he released a proposal called Workplace Democracy, and it was basically a plan for strengthening labor rights and workplace protections in the U.S. And one plank of this plan was to establish just cause for all workers, so basically to end at-will employment. And unsurprisingly, various free market enthusiasts totally freaked out. I think the Cato Institute had a fit, and one of the economists there called Sanders' plan to end at-will employment, quote, his most eyebrow-raising labor market plan. And we see this happening again with the new New York legislation. So one employment lawyer who spoke to the New York Times recently, Eli Friedberg, I think we have a quote from him. He was talking about the new protections for fast food workers, and he said of the new legislation, "It's galling. It changes the entire psyche and underpinning of the American employer-employee relationship." And I like this quote because he's definitely right on the last point that ending at-will employment actually changes the very nature of the relationship between the employer and the employee. And that's what we want. And that's also why any good union contract is going to include just cause protections. Because if you can be fired for anything or for literally no reason, then that essentially undermines any other rights or protections that you might have on the job, right? So just cause is really the backbone of a lot of other labor protections. Oh, and I also want to mention here that so in addition to the Just Cause bill, the New York City Council also passed a bill that requires fast food employers who are conducting layoffs to do the layoffs in reverse order of seniority. So kind of like a last hired, first fired principle. And I mention this because this is another protection that unions frequently fight for. So together with this New York legislation, you basically have a set of protections that are almost unheard of for a non-unionized workforce, and especially in the service sector. And so this is really a step forward. And, the bill is limited because, of course, it only extends to fast food workers so far, and it's limited to just New York City. But I think, given the state of employment in the US, it really does set what could be an important precedent. Other cities could follow this model in the future. And most importantly, these are really policies that shift the balance of power to workers a little bit more. And that's really, really rare in US politics. So I want to quickly play this amazing video that Ariella mentioned earlier, because I think it's pretty indicative of how politicians usually approach the issue of low-wage work. And as Ariella said, this is our soon-to-be VP, Kamala Harris. So let's watch.
Hey everyone, so this pandemic is hitting folks hard. And in particular, service workers, restaurant workers, gig workers who just don't have a safety net many of whom just there's no work for them right now. And so there's a fund that's set up, an emergency fund, One Fair Wage, as a way to give them support and assistance through the course of the pandemic. So I'd encourage you to give what you can. We're all in this together, and right now, so many people need our help. So whatever you're able to give, and take care. You take care.
So, as Ariella said, this is Kamala Harris, who's a literal lawmaker, talking about our lack of a social safety net as though it's like this mysterious accident of nature, and then telling the public to donate to the less fortunate. And, I just want to be clear that, like, of everybody in the Senate, I don't even think that Harris has like the worst record on labor and workplace rights. But at the same time, she hasn't signed on to something like ending at-will employment, right? So I think that the New York bill, like I said, is really significant. And I'll wrap up now, but I just want to end on a really quick note that I recently saw that, something like 90% of fast food workers in New York City are people of color. So, even though this new just cause legislation is totally race blind and I think has the potential to raise labor standards for everyone, it's also going to do a lot for, non-white workers in New York. And I think it's going to do more than the, diversity and sensitivity trainings that are now so popular. And I just mentioned those because, big companies love those, including fast food companies. So I think on that note, I am going to wrap up and I'll hand it over to you, Ariella.